The valley of Jezreel was drowning in a sea of shadows, but these were not shadows cast by clouds or mountains. Below the slopes of Mount Gilboa, the Midianite army lay encamped, a terrifying horde, thick as locusts. Their camels were without number, like the sand on the seashore. 135,000 men, seasoned in blood and conquest, waiting for the sun to rise so they could finally crush the spirit of Israel. And against them stood a man who, only days before, was hiding in a winepress to save a few grains of wheat. Gideon looked out over his army. 32,000 men had answered his call. By any human standard, they were hopelessly outnumbered, 1 against 4. But then, a voice broke through the silence of the night, a voice that defied every logic of war. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people with you are too many." Too many? In the cold calculus of survival, too many is a phrase that does not exist. Yet, the divine decree was absolute. God did not want a victory that men could claim as their own. He did not want a story of military genius. He wanted a revelation of absolute dependence. The first cut was psychological. Gideon stood before his 32,000 and spoke the words commanded of him. "Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return and depart." 22,000 men turned their backs and walked away. Imagine the scene. Gideon watches as nearly 70% of his strength dissolves into the darkness. The morale of those remaining must have plummeted. The odds had shifted from 4-1 to 13-1. 10,000 men remained. But the sifting was not over. The most mysterious test was yet to come. "There are still too many," the voice said. Just now, God led the remaining 10,000 men down to the water of the spring of Herod. It was a simple act, drinking water, but it would determine the fate of a nation. Gideon watched closely as the men approached the bank. Most of them, weary from the tension and the heat, dropped to their knees. They lowered their heads, burying their faces in the cool water, focusing only on their thirst. They were vulnerable. Their necks were exposed. Their eyes were fixed on the earth. But a small group, a mere 300 men, did not kneel. They remained on their feet. They cupped the water in their hands and lapped it like dogs, their eyes never leaving the horizon. Even in their thirst, they were warriors. Even in their need, they were vigilant. They did not let the blessing of the water blind them to the presence of the enemy. "With these 300 men," the Lord declared, "I will save you." 97% of the remaining army was sent home. Gideon was left with a fragment, a tiny spark against an ocean of darkness. The odds were now 450-1. This was no longer a battle. It was an impossibility. As the Vigilia de Medio, the middle watch of the night, approached, Gideon did something strange. He did not hand out swords. He did not hand out shields. He gave each of his 300 men a ram's horn trumpet and a clay jar with a torch hidden inside. The strategy was not to outfight the Midianites. It was to shatter their reality. In the pitch-black silence of the midnight hour, the 300 men surrounded the Midianite camp. They moved like ghosts, invisible in the mist. Gideon stood at the edge, his heart beating against his ribs. He gave the signal. Crack. 300 clay jars shattered simultaneously. The sound echoed through the valley like a sudden thunderclap. In an instant, 300 torches erupted into the night, appearing like an immense wall of fire surrounding the invaders. Then came the sound. 300 shofars blasted a piercing, supernatural wail that tore through the air. The 300 men shouted with a voice that sounded like a legion, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Panic is a contagious disease. The Midianites awoke to a nightmare. In the confusion and the blinding glare of the torches, they could not see who was friend or foe. They believed they were surrounded by an army of giants. They drew their swords in the dark, turning on each other in a frenzy of terror. The mighty horde that had come to devour the land began to devour itself. Gideon stood on the ridge, watching as the impossible became reality. He didn't need a bigger army. He didn't need better steel. He needed a broken jar. The jar had to be broken for the light to be seen. This is the eternal mystery of the 300. Sometimes your life feels like it is being reduced. Your resources are shrinking. Your friends are leaving. Your strength is failing. You feel small, outnumbered, and exposed. Remember the spring of Herod. God does not use the many. He uses the prepared. He does not use the proud. He uses the vigilant. When you are down to your last 300, when you are down to nothing but a jar and a flame, that is when the light shines the brightest. The question is, when the jars of your life break, will there be a light inside? The victory of Gideon was not won by the sword. It was won by the courage to be small. It was won by the faith to believe that a few men watching in the dark are more powerful than 100,000 sleeping in the valley. History remembers the kings and the conquerors, but God remembers the 300 who stayed awake.